Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rock. Roger Royse is a partner at Haynes Boone and the founder of the Royse Law Firm. Over his career, he's advised thousands of startups, built a name in tax and startup law, and authored 2 books sharing hard-earned lessons with founders and lawyers alike. Roger's story goes well beyond law. He's a CPA, an entrepreneur, an athlete, an author, and a pancreatic cancer survivor. His perspective is shaped by both deep professional wins and personal battles. In this episode, Roger reflects on his early years building a business tax-centered law firm from scratch, what it truly means to own your own practice, and why trying different types of law early matters. Check out Roger's content on his YouTube at Royse Law or his podcast 10,000 Startups, Legal Strategies for Startup Success. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey, Roger, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ollie. It's good to be here.
Super excited to have you on. You have such a decorated career. I'm super excited to dive into your background. Before we get started, I do want to start off with a quick icebreaker by asking you, if you had to change careers and restart, what would you be doing and why?
Jeez. Trust me, that's a question every lawyer asks themselves over and over again throughout their entire career. And depending on a day, my answer ranges from, country western music singer to accountant. So it's all over the place. Realistically, looking back, it seriously does change because every lawyer who does what I do anyway is somewhat of a frustrated businessman some days, because we see people who make tremendous amounts of money working way less hard than I do, and just having been what I consider to be a little bit lucky. On the other hand, for every one of them, we see 10, big smoking holes in the ground for things that fail. And then we're glad we chose the route that we did. So, like I say, that answer does change from time to time. I always thought I'd be a businessman. I never thought I'd be a lawyer. And in fact, I stayed in the law just because I felt like it was good for me. The intellectual challenge, because I had my own business, while I was in law school, but it was not intellectually challenging at all. I mean, you buy product in big boxes and put it in small boxes and make a profit. It's like, I can't see myself spending the rest of my life doing this. So I don't know that if I did do something different, I like to think that with all of my hindsight, it would probably be something in finance. I tend to have some aptitude for that. That's probably where I would have, been the most productive.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I mean, you did major in accounting and you did your JD. I do want to take it back, Roger, with your permission, take it back to your time at University of North Dakota. And what's interesting is I saw you did accounting and your JD there. So did you sort of, were you what they call a KJD, where they do the undergrad degree and go straight into law school?
I didn't know they called it that, but that's what I did. And my motivation was, I just wasn't, I was having so much fun in school. I just said, I don't want the party to end. So how can I keep this going? I know, law school.
I love it. So it was more so just you wanted to stay in school. You didn't have plans to get a JD and become a lawyer at the time you started studying accounting?
No, I did. I've known since I was about 12 years old. That's what I wanted to do. And it was easy. It was easy to do because the alternative, keep in mind, so 4 years of undergrad, and then I took the CPA exam, and I could have gone to work right then at the ripe old age of 21, I think at that point, maybe 22. And it's like, this is just, I'm young. I should still be learning. So yes, I did plan on going to law school. But secondly, even if I had not made that plan, it still seemed a little early to kick me out onto the street and make me start earning a living for the rest of my life.
Gotcha. Well, you apparently you really like school, because you did go back to school 5 years later at NYU to do your LLM. But before that, I saw you're an attorney at Niles Hansen in North Dakota. So what was that experience like, working as a first job as a lawyer?
Well, so I'm from North Dakota, so that's where I started, my school, and I went to the University of North Dakota for 2 reasons. One, they had a really good accounting program, and that was my major. And secondly, they had a nationally ranked wrestling team, and I was a wrestler and I wanted to wrestle, and the UND wanted me to come wrestle for them, so it was a perfect match. Um, and then after that, I stuck around because I did not expect that I would ever leave the state of North Dakota, because why would anyone leave here? That was my thought process at the time. And so right out of school, I went to work for a law firm in Fargo. The name then was Nillis Hanson, I think Davies, Selbo, and McGill. And it was quite an education by fire, because when you're in a small market like that, you get to, as one of my friends used to say, you get to malpractice in so many areas. Um, in other words, you get to do a lot of different things and learn what you're good at, and just as importantly, what you're not, and what you like to do, and what you tend to do. So I did that for about 4 years. I had a great time. I really liked the firm. I really liked I know it sounds odd now, but I like the Fargo lifestyle. And I liked everything about it. But at the end of 4 years, I came to realize I really like doing tax more than anything else. And I was probably doing most of the tax work in that city at the time, but still there weren't enough rich people there to keep a tax lawyer as busy or as interested as I wanted to be. And that's why I went back to school.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me asking, what about the tax practice attracted to you the most?
Again, it was the intellectual challenge. Well, first of all, I found that it kind of came easy to me. Uh, and I just learned from an early age to deal with numbers. I know everybody says this, but I really am a numbers guy. And so, and more than numbers, the concepts behind the numbers. And the concepts came relatively easy to me. So I was naturally inclined towards it. And I had a background of, my undergrad was accounting. So it was kind of a natural. But it's more the concepts. When you get into tax, you find out it's not as cookbook as people think. It's really this kind of complex combination of statutory construction, policy. What did the legislature mean? What did they actually do? Um, and plus, you've got lots of money riding on the outcome. So I really liked everything about it. So tax is just a natural for me, but it was, keep in mind, in law, that we all have to have, we're not doing this for the money. As much as the outside world thinks that, I really think any lawyer can make more money doing something else. I certainly could have continued to buy and sell stuff. We're doing it because of the intellectual interest. And once you lose that, then I think it's time to find a different career. And there's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of lawyers, end up going and doing something else. We only stay in this because it's interesting, and tax was interesting to me.
Yeah, it sounds like you were fortunate to realize what your passion was. Things are just so front loaded now in law school, where you're expected to sort of make a decision about corporate versus litigation and practice area, like basically within your first semester. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm rare that way, and that I stayed true to, because I knew, like I say, from a young age, that I would do accounting, law, and focus on tax. In fact, I didn't pivot until fairly late in my career, fairly recently. But I think the best thing you can do in law school or just out is you just got to try it. And I'll just anecdotally, I'll tell you, when I had my firm, we had an estate planning department, and I hired directly out of law school, and I brought a young associate into the firm right out of law school to do estate planning, and he loved estate planning. He loved everything about it. He was the chairman of his law school estate planning group, and he took all the classes, and he just loved it until he actually did one. And he did. I'm not kidding. He did one. He worked on one. And after the meeting with the insurance broker, he came into my office. He says, if I have to do that for the rest of my life, I mean, I think I'll kill myself. It's not interesting to me at all.
At least he
And
was honest.
yeah, and he figured it out right away, early enough in his career where he was able to pivot and he ended up focusing on fund formation after that, which is what he really wanted to do. So you got to try stuff though. And what I really like is a lot of law firms, they kind of let you cycle from department to department to department until you hit that thing. Like everybody thinks they want to do litigation, you know, until you actually do litigation. Then you might come to realize, yeah, that was fun to do once in your lifetime. But if I have to spend the rest of my life that stressed out, yeah, no thanks.
Totally. Yeah. It's just I love how you're stressing the value of just getting a perspective, trying out different things. And yeah, it sounds like a lot of firms do have those rotational programs. I want to ask about your time getting your LLM. First of all, what was that experience like? And secondly, do you recommend folks that are interested in tax, if they already have a JD, go out and get their LLMs?
Yes, these days it's not, you know, I mean, it's not essential, but it is just about. It's a huge competitive advantage. It's tremendously valuable. It's You'd be surprised within tax how many different areas of specialty there are. So anyone who wants to do that, I think it just really is super valuable.
Gotcha. And so you moved from New York to the Bay Area, if I'm not mistaken, to San Jose. And I'm curious about what inspired the move.
Yeah, so the trajectory was I started back in my home state of Fargo. I worked there for 4 years. I had an opportunity to go to New York to get an LLM in tax, and I took it. And my intention was 100%. My intention was to get my degree and come back to North Dakota and spend the rest of my life out on the prairie. But once how are you going to keep them down on the farm once they've seen the city lights? So I stayed in New York. I got a job in New York, worked with a firm there for 3 years. And I was a tourist for 3 years, really, a tourist with a job. And it was really fun and exciting. And I'll tell you what inspired me. It's kind of funny how such little things can make such huge differences in people's lives. You don't realize until you get to be extremely old like me and you look back on it. But while I was there in New York, in fact, it was about this time of year, we had a client. It was a big movie studio in LA, Hollywood. And they ran into this tax issue because the law had just changed. And it, you know, complex, interesting issue, but very factual. So my boss said, "Hey, pack your bags. You're going to LA to go solve this problem with me." And I said, "Okay, how long are we going to be there?" And he says, "However long it takes. Probably a couple of days." Well, I was there for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, I showed up at the movie studio every day and I ate in the cafeteria, and like John Travolta would sit down next to me, and I saw these movie stars walking around, and the weather was nice, and people were friendly, which was a big change from New York City. And and when the weekend came, we all got on our bikes and rode out to the ocean. And I think my California bar application beat me home, beat me back to New York. And I said, "That's it. I found me a home." So then I took a closer look, and I really liked LA was all I'd seen of the West Coast. But after going up and down the coast and looking everywhere, I said, I think the Silicon Valley sort of fits my goals. They kind of check the most boxes. They got nice weather, they got surfing, they got hills. They've got this technology industry that I think is going to turn into something someday, which was a good bet. Um, so I liked everything about it, and this is where I ended up. And I
Yeah.
didn't know I was going to be here for the next 35 years, but here we are.
Yeah, what an amazing strategic bet. I mean, it looks like you came in 1991 to San
Yep.
Jose, and that was, yeah, 9, 10 years right before everything went absolutely crazy. So, wow, what a move. And yeah, like you said, you've been here for quite a while. And so you're at that firm until 1995 as a tax associate. So now you've been practicing as a tax associate for about 7 or 8 years. And then can I ask why you made the move to the next firm in about 1995?
Well, when you're in an area doing work for small businesses, you form businesses, or startups or do corporate or anything like that, you see so many entrepreneurs and it sort of rubs off on you. And you want to have ownership of what you're doing. And like I say, I had a business in law school, a couple of them. So I moved on to a firm that had a model where you basically you built your own practice and your fortunes lived and died on that practice, and that was really appealing to me because I had the sense when I was working at my first firm, which was a great firm. They treated me well. I made a lot of good friends there, but I was still an employee, and I just did not want to be an employee anymore. I wanted to be, you know, more in charge of my destiny than that, and that was the biggest factor in the move. It's a great motivator when you're working to build something for yourself.
Gotcha. So you were able to have a little bit more autonomy and ownership. What does that look like? Is that more so on the business development side?
Mostly, yeah. So I could decide what kind of work I would do, and I would develop my own clients. And like I say, my fortunes would rise and fall as to how well I guessed, and got better clients. And I really embrace that. And as because I remember just as new things came along in the law, I would sit and learn them, and I would just declare myself the expert in this new area of the law and go out and market it and get the clients and do the work. And that was actually really fun. Still is.
Love it, love it. And just to give the audience sort of a timeline, where this is 1995 to 2003 at this firm, so this is like right during the dot-com era. So, I mean, give me an idea of what did the landscape look like? Was there just a ton of companies starting to get like beginning? Were you sort of overloaded with work, and then obviously the collapse happened? So, curious what that experience was like.
Yes, it was insane. It was like drinking from a fire hose. We were always so swamped and overloaded during that period. And the optimism was just off the charts. And every lawyer was taking stock for fees. That's how optimistic. I still have so much stock, and
Wow.
companies that have, most of which, have gone away long ago. And we were, yeah, it was quite a time to be doing deals, and was just silly numbers that didn't make any sense. Companies, I mean, kids, I mean, I had my clients were in dorm rooms for the most part, a lot of them, and they'd come up with an idea and create a PowerPoint and walk into a venture capitalist office and get funded. And this was before, Internet 2.0, when anybody could go get tools and build a company on a shoestring. Back then, the first financing had to be a pretty big financing. It's just the way it was. All the financings we were doing, were relatively large. That meant the valuations had to be large and the expectations had to be large. It was really an interesting time to be in this valley.
Gotcha. In your opinion, sort of like what was the downfall of this whole area? Like what went wrong?
Oh my God, we could talk. I mean, so many people have talked for so long about that, and it was one of those perfect storms, of world, geopolitical pressure, world economies, but people really investing in vaporware. Now, as a lawyer, so I can't speak really to any of that. I'm not the business guy, but as a lawyer, I will tell you that the downfall was a total lack of due diligence. There just was none in most of these startup investments. Um, Not much emphasis on track record. Over FOMO, I would say people were giving crazy valuations because they did not want to miss out. So it's like any frothy market that you see. We see it today. Even now, not like it was then, because the internet kind of drove most of that, I would say, because people had which came true, by the way, big expectations for the internet. I mean, people like Bill Gates were out there saying it's going to be bigger than anyone thinks, in 10 years. So, it was just the expectations were really high. Things got really frothy. And,
Yeah.
well, the rest.
Yeah, it just I mean, I didn't live I was very young during that era, but just watching the AI boom right now, I mean, the valuations seem so insane these days as well, and it does seem like folks are saying the same thing that they said about the internet. So, can you draw parallels between, current times and, during the dot-com boom?
We keep trying, but nothing ever approaches it because I keep hearing it, and I keep saying, I've heard this story before. Remember NFTs a few years ago? Hardly. And everyone was saying this is going to be bigger than the internet. Well, wait a minute. I've heard this. This is going to be huge before. And yeah, NFTs, we have a new SEC, so maybe that'll be a better market now, but still, it's not bigger than the internet. That is my opinion. So you see that artificial intelligence is what everyone's talking about now. And again, I'm just the lawyer here. I'm not qualified to tell you whether that's going to be bigger than the internet. I honestly, I think that will be pretty big. I am seeing some parallels, but in fact, now that you mention it, back then, no matter what your business was, you'd go down to the Secretary of State's office and change your name and add .com behind it. And I'm kind of seeing that. That tells you a lot. And I'm seeing that with AI now. Everybody's adding .ai behind their name, and are they AI companies? They might be AI enabled. They might be using AI. Everybody should be, at some level. But you can see there certainly is a lot of cachet attached to that. And that does remind me of some of the over exuberance back when we had parrotfood.com, getting funded.
Yeah. No, I love your perspective on this. And then before we move on to the next role at Montgomery and Hanson in 2003, just one last question on the legal landscape. What did the regulatory landscape look like during this time? Was it sort of just the Wild West?
Not as much. No, not as much as you think. In fact, I would say it is much more Wild West now because back then, if you wanted to sell securities, you pretty much had to go to a lawyer or you were going to mess it up for sure. And these days, everybody goes out and they download a safe off of a certain website, and they take money and they don't do any securities filings and they don't ask if the investors accredit it, and nobody cares. It's like nobody is enforcing anything. Those companies, 20 years, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you had to come in with a company that had those same investors on the cap table, you would have a problem. You would have a due diligence problem. And now people are kind of like, that's every company does that.
Yeah, I saw your video on safes where you said like, all the stuff you download on the internet is probably investor friendly and you want to be really careful about using this sort of stuff.
I'm the old curmudgeon now because it is investor friendly. Some of it is I read this and I say, I'd be embarrassed to even put that in writing, but there it is, and people are using it. And the worst part is that the people who are creating these documents are changing it and then saying, well, that's the new market. So yes, you've done it this way for the last 20 years, but you know what? We've changed the form and everyone's using our form. So we have just changed the market. The market didn't dictate the form that you're drafting. You changed the market. And that's all I'll say about it. It's incredible. Like, to me, that could even happen. You know, sometimes you look at things and you say, wait a minute, that's not how this should go.
Yeah, was it the slide deck I saw was the Zipcar founders that did the 50-50 deal where it turned out to be a huge headache for one of the founders because one was full time and one wasn't. Anyway, that's a story for another day, but it sounds like, yeah,
I
you've
have a
definitely.
million issues like that. You can read about them in one of my two books, by the way. So I go on
Yeah.
about those.
Yeah, I would love to get to that. I'd love to hear about sort of your projects at the end of this because you have a lot of social media content out there and books. But yeah, so you then went to Montgomery and Hanson, and are you sort of just are these opportunities that are coming up because of your network, because of mentors, because of clients and business development? How are you able to get these opportunities?
Montgomery and Hanson was founded by a former partner and good friend of mine named John Montgomery, and he had gone to Brobeck and left Brobeck, went to another firm, and decided. He called me up one day and said, "Let's just do our own thing." and that made just made a lot of sense to me at the time. Uh, I just wanted fewer restrictions on what I was doing. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to try different things, and I just needed a platform that allowed me to go crazy that way.
So it
So,
was a smaller firm.
three of us started with three of us. I
Wow.
think they're bigger now, but that's how we started it. Yeah.
You've always been entrepreneurial. I mean, and then you went on to found Royce Law Firm, which you did for 14 years, which is amazing. And you grew that firm. I mean, what did that feel like to finally start, Royce Law Firm and sort of really go all in on your own firm? And especially initially, was it scary? Like, what were the feelings around that?
Yeah, it was scary. I know I know exactly what startup founders feel like because I'll never forget signing because you can go big or go home, right? I knew if I was going to do this, I was going to want to scale it up. I wasn't going to just rent one office. So I rented a whole floor in fact, the same space where Wilson Sonsini started in
Wow.
downtown Palo Alto. And I remember the day I signed that lease, and then I remember writing a check for the furniture because I had to buy furniture and the computers, and I filled the place out. I went all in, and you know, I made a big bet on that. Um, and
Incredible.
yeah, it's scary, and I learned what all the startup entrepreneurs learn. I walked in their shoes. I mean, I learned how frustrating it can be to be held up over little administrative things like if your internet goes down and and for 14 years, really the buck stopped with me. And I mean, for 14 years, like I'd get a call at 3 in the morning and have to go down to the office if a squirrel, tripped the burglar alarm. That was all me. So yeah, it was scary, and there were some downsides. On the other hand, we were able to build exactly what I wanted to build, which was a business tax centered law firm. So we were going to lead with business tax, and everything else would flow around that. That's not the traditional way that law firms operate. Usually, there's a corporate lawyer that's the engine, and everybody else is a car on the engine. Employment tax, IP, etc. Hopefully not litigation, but it's the corporate that kind of keeps everything going. I went the other way. I said, look, all these people want a certain after-tax result. We're going to lead with that. I'm going to start by saying, look, we're going to get you an after-tax result, and I'll fill in all the other pieces that we need to get you there. But let's kind of start with the end in mind.
What an awesome differentiation. And I mean, maybe what was one big challenge that happened that maybe you didn't expect? Maybe it was around hiring or employees or anything like that. Like, what was something that was kind of unexpected that was a huge thing that you had to overcome?
There was no one. It was like every day, I felt like I was betting the farm, having to make a decision. There's so many things you don't see coming. Um, the rise of cyber threats was something that I worried about a lot for the entire time because we came so close so many times with people managed almost tricking us and almost getting into my trust account and almost doing this and that.
Wow.
That's one I would have expected that we would have law enforcement that would have stopped that by
Mm.
then, and we don't even have that now. So that was one. Um, the concept that not all lawyers are created equal, and you just don't know, how someone's going to work out until after you hire them and work with them, and you get some hints from their resume, but they were only hints. They were by no means determinative. And I had people that had awesome resumes, from degrees from the best schools and good grades and everything, but they, did not help me out at all as lawyers. And I had people who had more humble beginnings that were just awesome lawyers. So that was a surprise. You know, challenge. What are the challenge? Well, one challenge that I don't know if we have that challenge today, but at the time, it's really hard to get space, and you find a lot of people, including a lot of law firms, would end up working for their landlords, at the end of the day,
Wow.
and would be busted up or held together because of their leases. So being really careful about the real estate, and I got really lucky and early. We got really good real estate, and we got it at rates that were reasonable. So stuff like that. I guess one big challenge I'll leave you with is just the administrative stuff was such a shock. You can't believe
Really?
just how much effort, time and effort. So those of you in law firms, I mean, go down and thank your office managers. You have no idea, what they're doing to keep you afloat, to keep the lights on, to keep the internet running, to keep the phones, working, all that stuff. Because when I started, it was like, oh, I can do that. It was just me. And that was a constant headache and a constant job. Stuff
Wow.
was always breaking and always needing replacement and always, oh, you got to go spend 6 hours. I'm not making this up. Spend 6 hours on the phone with some guy in Pakistan who finally says, oh, yeah, you need to push that button. So, anyway, that's just a handful.
Yeah, insane. I mean, on the flip side, Roger, maybe what's one high point or a deal you did or a customer or something that happened where you were like, this is all worth it. This is amazing. Is any sort of anecdotes or stories?
Oh yeah, we had great successes. We had great time, especially in the early years. And one in particular, I represented a solar company. I was brought in through the investor. That's how it often happens in law: is you represent an investor. The company gets to know you. The company decides they like you. They hire you to represent the company. And here I had 3, 4 lawyers in my firm at that time. It was very early, and we did. So they did what ended up being a $200 million financing, and it was the most complex deal still of my career ever because of
Wow.
the nature of the business. Everything you could think of to make something complicated, this company had. The nature of the ownership, the nature of the business, the nature of the management, the litigation, the claims, the tax issues, everything. And I remember, like, we'd sit on these conference calls that would last 12 hours negotiating this deal. I'd get there at 6 in the morning, 12, longer. I wouldn't get home till past midnight. And with foreign counsel, and there'd be me, and on the other end of the phone, there'd be like a dozen lawyers, in all these
Oh
different
my
areas. And I
gosh.
had to basically, because I had one little firm, so I hired, I bet I hired maybe a dozen other law firms myself to come in on like international trade. I had someone on IP and someone on data, and so I had to find, the only expert in the country on, I'm not making this up, solar powered submarines. I mean, just all these different various aspects. I had 2 different sets of tax advisors, and we pulled that deal off. I remember going to the closing, and I'm sitting there, and one of the, I think still one of the 3 largest law firms in the world was on the other side. And I'm sitting there at the conference table, and there's me, and there's all these lawyers, and we're signing documents. And at one point, the investor looks at me and he says, did you get the feeling in this deal that this was a little like David and Goliath? And I said, yeah, a little bit, but which one am I?
Love it. That's incredible. And so, how did that deal end up?
Well, we closed the deal. It was very successful, and 2 or 3 years later, the company went bankrupt. So depends on your
Incredible.
perspective how it ended up.
Gotcha. Amazing. Well, I want to wrap up with two more things. I want to discuss your transition to Haynes and Boone, and then talk about a big health obstacle that you overcame. So I do want to talk about what inspired that transition. You ran your own law firm for 14 years. Did you have plans to go back into quote unquote big law?
Yes, I always knew that would be an exit plan in the back of my mind. I didn't know exactly when, but one day, I will tell you, I woke up, it was on my birthday. And I remember I woke up that day and I said, today's the day. It's time. And it was a little push and pull. And the push was, I'm spending too much of my time on administrative issues, just dealing with stuff that I don't like to deal with. I'd rather do more of the law, which is why I got into this in the first place. And secondly, I have too small a firm. We had 30 lawyers at the time, but this is too small a place to service my clients because they are growing so quickly and they just need more services than I can provide. And and I need a bigger platform.
Wow.
And Haynes Boone was looking for more corporate support on the West Coast, so it was really a good match. Uh, I want to share one thing with you before we move on to your last topic, because um, this is a story that I've told many times over the years, and I know I'm shifting topics entirely, but given your audience, I think they're going to want to hear this. And I like to tell people that this is a tale of three lawyers, because you've got me thinking about it as we went through my trajectory. But on the 20th anniversary of my graduation from NYU, uh, I got a call from two of my old classmates. It was kind of a wild coincidence. They both called me in the same month. And one of them was in Chicago, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be in town. I'd like to stop in and see you." And I said, "What's up?" And he says, "Well, I am the managing partner of my big Chicago law firm, and I have a focus area in this, and I'm doing kind of a West Coast, business development swing, and I want to come and tell you what I do." So, very successful guy. And he and I actually worked together for a short period of time in New York after I graduated, and he went off to Chicago and ended up, at the top of, managing his firm. Very well known, super well known. Everybody in the Midwest knows him, and he basically could do anything he wants. The second call was from a woman in our class, and we all had about the same grades. We all were in about the same position. We all went to large firms right out of NYU. And she says, "Yeah, I'd like to come and visit with you as well." And I said, "Oh, okay. What about?" She says, "I need a job because the firm I went to work for, after 20 years of being there, one day they just walked into my office and said, 'Your services are no longer needed.'" And I said, "Well, that's a drag, but 20 years of the big firm, you probably have kind of a big client base. You must have seen every big company in your town." She said, "No, actually not. I just kind of stayed in my office and did the work. Someone else did client interface." And I said, "Well, you must have like this deep expertise in something that's really valuable, whatever it is you're doing." "Well, no, what I did, my firm, they drove me to be very, very, very specialized and niche, and it really only works in large firm settings." And I said, "As much as I'd like to help you, there's nothing I can do for you." And that story really bothers me, because here you have two people that started out at almost the exact same place. And 20 years later, they're in one person can write his own, ticket, work anywhere he wants. And the other person is really at the mercy of the system. And is no longer marketable. And I thought a lot about that. What is the difference between those two people? What did they do differently? And I tell this to associates and younger lawyers all the time: the importance of building your own personal brand. Because one lawyer worked on that for 20 years and is now basically untouchable. The other lawyer spent no time at all on that and is now starting all over. So I just wanted to leave you with that story for your law student.
Incredible, incredible advice. And it's something that's not taught in law school. I do want to just double click on that briefly. Like, how do you build your brand as a law student? What kind of things can you start thinking about? Is it writing blog posts, making videos, doing stuff like this? Or what do you have in mind?
Uh, well, the way you build it is you always say yes. So people say, "I'd like to, would you like to?" That's what I did. I submitted articles. I figured out how to write letters to the editor that would get published in the business journals, which is an art, by the way. Um, I did a lot. I do videos. I do podcasts. I wrote 2 books. Tons of articles. I speak every chance I get to the ABA, the business law section, tax section, California Lawyers Association, state bar associations. You just really have to dig in, deep. And that's different, by the way, than just being out at every event every night. I don't think that's nearly, that's exposure. You want expertise, right? You want to show off your expertise, not just exposure. I think both are important, but expertise is way better. So I think that's the real answer. And, there's three steps to that. I tell people, number one, you got to get really good at what you do. That's first, before you think about doing anything, you find a thing you do really, really well, you know, then secondly, then you got to go out and be able to do it for your clients. You got to promote yourself to your clients. And then thirdly, you got to be able to build on that, be able to promote other people that you supervise. That's the career trajectory. That's how I think it should go.
Amazing advice, and not easy to do. Easier said than done. But yeah,
It's a lot
go
of
ahead.
work, for sure. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the insight. I mean, this is advice that it sounds like you've gained from your entire career and just reflecting on your story. So that's amazing. Last thing I want to talk about, Roger, and this is something I couldn't stop seeing when I was researching about you, is your journey with pancreatic cancer. And I was reading about how you found this test that you decided to do yourself because it ran in your family history. And, in some ways, the healthcare system sort of failed you. And it sounds like, this was, sort of a life changing experience for you. So I'll just sort of open it up to you. And I want to ask, what was that experience like?
Well, yeah, that story is way more popular than I ever expected. It seems to resonate with a lot of people. But to make a long story short, I will say that, yeah, I found out I had pancreatic cancer about 2.5 years ago. And we caught it early because I used a test, a blood test by Gallery, and I was able to get treatment. And the treatment failed me, but I did enough research on my own to find things that did not. And so far I'm okay. I'm healthier now than I've ever been. I'm always looking over my shoulder because I'm at high risk, but I feel like I'm in a pretty good position. Oddly, we really don't know what causes cancer, but I am spending a lot of my effort trying to find out, because whatever caused it is what would make it come back, and I don't want it to come back. And I think it's that's another several hour long discussion, but I kind of think I know what a person can do to maximize their odds on that. So when you say the healthcare system failed me, I wouldn't go that far. The message I'm trying to preach, and this is controversial for a lot of reasons, but the message I'm trying to preach is one of individual responsibility. People really have to take charge of their own health care. And I say it's controversial because there are doctors who think that oh, that's turf. That's what we do. Well, no, it's not. It's not what doctors do. Doctors fix you when it's broken. I want to keep you from becoming broken. It's like I tell people when they ask me advice about cancer, I say, well, the best way to deal with cancer is not to get it, you know? So, and that means healthy lifestyle. And the more I dig into it, in fact, we all ought to be a little bit angry about this. I'm not angry. I'm just like, I should have figured this out sooner. All the stuff that I'm learning now about health and longevity. And let me just give you a couple of things, because lawyers especially need to keep this in mind, because this profession will absolutely ruin your health if you let it at so many levels. But the Surgeon General just recently came out with a report on alcohol. They changed their position. It took them all this time to finally come out on alcohol and declare that it's not good for you. In fact, what they say in that report, and I quote, is that there is no safe amount of alcohol. Well, I think back to my law school days. I wish I'd known that then. And that's just part of every social event you go to. It's part of when you take your clients out for lunch or meet them for drinks or stuff like that. The best answer is zero, just none at all. Secondly, I think highly processed carbs, especially including sugar. Now, we've all gotten smarter about high fructose corn syrup, and that's not used nearly as much, but we're not that smarter about table sugar since that's been around a lot longer. I just think we need to cut back on all of that stuff. Sleep, we're starting to understand now the importance of sleep, and that's one of the first things to go for a lawyer. I wish, I used to keep, in fact, I think I still have a sleeping bag in my office,
Wow.
because there are a lot of times, my daughter thought that was the funniest thing, that, that I was so, I might have to be here, for long nights. So, if we can avoid compromising sleep, stress, I didn't realize what a factor stress was until I started taking biomarkers. And I thought I was immune to stress because I never showed anything until I came to discover nobody's immune to stress. And the other reason I say this is controversial because you're listening to me talk about fit and exercise. People don't exercise near enough, and that's weight training and cardio. And most people just don't. And then finally, I'll just say nutrition and supplements because most people are deficient in some necessary supplements. I had all of those problems, and plus some environmental toxins I was able to locate and eliminate. So
Wow.
lots of stuff. And so that's the message is just to really, people have to take charge of their own health. And I'll just now you got me going, and now you're going to be sorry you asked. But when you go to your doctor, because I just think about this, and they'll do whatever they do, and let's say you're not sick, so or they tell you you're not sick, and you might ask them, what should I do to keep from getting sick? They will not have a good answer for you. That's just not what they do. You know how I know they won't have a good answer? Because I ask that questions all the time. I asked my doctors, what should I eat? And the answer I got was, doesn't matter, just don't lose any more weight. Okay, wrong answer. It matters a lot. Is my blood sugar okay? Yeah, your blood sugar's fine. Wrong answer. You want your blood sugar lower, than what, if you're in pre-diabetic range, as far as they're concerned, you're fine. I know
Wow.
this. I've heard this. I've seen this in other people. So they're not there to optimize your health. They're really there for those kind of battlefield combat conditions when you're really sick and everybody's running around trying to save you. So I think the individual himself have to go out, do the education, and figure out what it takes to keep yourself healthy.
Wow, just an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I saw a lot of pictures and videos of you staying active, ice climbing, mountain biking, running. So it sounds like, you stay extremely active. But yeah, really, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, that was so. So here's how that started. Exercise, it helps for a lot of reasons I don't have time to get into, but it helps. If you are a cancer patient, exercise helps. It helps as much or more, probably more than chemo for so many reasons. And so I started exercising. And of course, the U.S. guidelines and the doctors all tell you, oh, try to get 150 minutes a week. Well, that's not nearly enough, not nearly. So, but I did as much as I could for as long as I could. And so that's the good news. Exercise helps. Good. I've given myself permission to do all this because I like doing it. And now I have a really good reason for doing all these things I did 30 years ago. It was really fun, like triathlons and Spartan races and climbing and all that stuff.
Love it. Love it. Amazing, Roger. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this podcast. Your career is just so decorated and a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Hope you got what you needed.